9:03. Good morning. Welcome to the May 31st, 2022 Board of Police Commissioners meeting. We acknowledge we are on the traditional lands of Treaty 4 territory, treaty signed with 35 First Nations across southern Saskatchewan and parts of Alberta and Manitoba, the original lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. The City of Regina owes its strength and vibrancy to these lands and the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory, and as well as the settlers from around the world who continue to be welcomed here and call Regina home. Some members of the board may be attending the meeting today through video conferencing, and I'd like to remind those members who are attending to please ensure your video camera and microphone are off. If you wish to speak, use the raised hand function and you'll be placed in the speaking queue. And when speaking, please unmute your microphone and enable your camera. Can I have a motion to approve the public agenda? Thank you, Commissioner Yee. I'll call the question. Anyone opposed? Carried. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from the meeting held on April 26th, 2022? Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. Any errors or omissions? Okay, I'll call the question. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, carried. Our first report is PO 22-15, the variance report as at April 30th, 2022. And I'm going to ask Chief if you could introduce the report before you turn it over to Ms. Reason.
Great. Thank you very much. Good morning, Mayor and members of our board. As of only about a year ago, we were reporting variance on a regular basis to our Board of Police Commissioners in the private session and had some dialogue with the board about whether we could be more transparent and bring forward some variance reporting publicly. Up until that time, there was a very small variance report that was done publicly about the police by the City of Regina. And so, as you are aware, we committed to coming to our public session twice a year with variance updates. So this is kind of our mid-year update on variance. We'll be doing another one closer to the end of the year. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our Manager of Financial Services, Tracy Raisin. Tracy.
Good morning, Mayor Masters and members of the board. I'm here to present our budget variance as of April 30th. So I will begin with the operating budget, which is in that first attachment. So 34% of the year is now complete and 31% of our operating budget has been spent. We are currently projecting a small surplus of around $146,000. So at this time, the revenue surplus is largely a result of some new provincial funding from the Saskatchewan Trafficking Response Team. The total funding for that team in 2022 is $321,500, which is cost recovery of the salaries, benefits, and operating expenses of the unit. So the provincial government approved this funding after our 2022 budget was in place, and therefore that's why this additional revenue is shown as a variance item. I will now move on to the capital budget, which is in the second attachment. As you can see, there are 6 categories of capital programs, which each have a number of programs within each. Currently, the forecasts for all of the projects are still within budget, and there's a few delays due to shipping and supply issues of IT equipment and fleet vehicles, but we're seeing a lot of those now coming through. But otherwise, the projects are moving ahead and still within budget. That concludes my variance report as of April 30th. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Raisin. Do any members of the commission have any questions? Councillor Stevens?
Yeah, just one. If you could please elaborate on the sources of provincial funding that you had mentioned that brought us to a bit of a surplus.
Sure. So the Saskatchewan Trafficking Response Team is the new funding that we're receiving, and that's from the provincial government, and that consists of RCMP officers and municipal officers from Saskatoon, Regina, and Prince Albert, and they'll be dedicated to tackling illegal weapons, drugs, and human trafficking in Saskatchewan.
Perfect.
So that's where that's from.
Thank you.
I can just add a little to that. We often find ourselves in this situation because the fiscal year for the province is different than the fiscal year for police. So we'll come out with a budget, and then if they make a decision through budget process that they want to increase commitment to policing, even if it's 1 or 2 members, that's not captured in our budget. So it looks as though it's an increase. Well, it is an increase in revenue, but it's also an increase in expense for us. So we show it as variance for that first year, and then it becomes part of our regular budget going forward.
Perfect. Seeing no Further questions? Could I have a motion to receive and file the report? Thank you, Commissioner Yu. Call the question. Anyone opposed? Carried. Next up is PO 22-16, Use of Force Year-End 2021. Chief, I understand you have a PowerPoint presentation. Could you please introduce the report?
Great, thank you very much. So this is our annual use of force review that we provide to the board and to the public. Use of force is something that we obviously follow very closely. We look for trends, we look for opportunities to make improvements, and there's a very strict line of reporting and reviewing of all use of force incidents that happen within our police service. So on an annual basis, we tabulate these results. It's reported provincially to the Saskatchewan Police Commission, but it also is something that we come and speak with our board about and speak about publicly, just to provide transparency and understanding about what the process looks like, what the review process looks like, and gives us a snapshot of what the previous year entailed in terms of number of forces, use of force that was used in comparison to contacts we had with the public, arrests that we made, and those types of things. Inspector Brad Walter is with us here today, and Staff Sergeant Cam Kuffner is also here. They both sit on the Use of Force Review Board, and so this report has been prepared and will be presented to you by Inspector Walter this morning. I'll turn it over to Brad.
Good morning, Mayor Masters and members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to report on the Regina Police Service Use of Force Review Board 2021 year-end report. I have put together a presentation, PowerPoint presentation, because there's some visual things that'll help us understand the report. So I'll work through there, and if there's any questions during the presentation or after, I'll be happy to answer those. So the Use of Force Review Board for the Regina Police Service is an internal review board. It's comprised of 7 members of RPS and 1 Regina Police Association observer. The board, or the committee, examines all reportable uses of force involving Regina Police Service members, and it ensures adherence to federal laws, provincial statutes, and internal policies. One of the tools that we use to review and assess use of force situations is the use of force model. This was adopted in Saskatchewan in about the year 2000. And what it is a graphical representation of the elements involved in the use of force, and which helps us to understand why and in what manner an officer may respond with force. It promotes a continuous critical assessment throughout a situation. And we're just going to walk through this a little bit to give you a general understanding of the model. This is a portion of what the officers would receive in training. It's certainly only a small portion. There's other things that are added, but it'll give you a bit of an understanding. So the model is based on 6 principles, which are the primary responsibility of a police officer or peace officer is to protect and preserve life. The primary objective of any use of force is to ensure public safety. Officer safety is essential to public safety. The use of force model does not replace or augment the law, and the model reflects federal statute, law, and case law, and it's not intended to dictate policy to any agency. So on the model, there's a center core, and it's called the situation. It's always changing, and police are obligated to continually assess, create a plan, and act reasonably throughout the entire incident. There's 6 factors that affect the situation. One is the environment, so lighting, cold, those kinds of things. The number of subjects that police are encountering or dealing with. The perceived abilities of that subject. Knowledge about that subject, whether it's personal knowledge from previous involvement or information that you receive from witnesses or from, say, our dispatch. And the use of time and distance will dictate some of our decisions, and any potential attack signs that we may see coming from a subject that we're dealing with. As we move out into the use of force model around the circle, we're going to see there's subject behaviors that we would potentially encounter. One is a cooperative subject. A person can also be passive resistant. They could be active resistant. They could be assaultive, or they could exhibit grievous bodily harm or death. So There's two separate factors that may affect an officer's overall assessment. Perception and tactical considerations rely on these. It's represented in the same area of the model, and it may explain why two officers' responses may differ in the exact same circumstance. Each officer's perception is unique, and both perception and tactical considerations are interrelated, so they're in the same area of the model. What kinds of things would influence our perception? Well, the strength and overall fitness of an officer, their personal and professional experience, skills and training that they've received, fears of what they may encounter, their gender, their fatigue, whether it's at the end of a shift, at some point into a struggle or a fight, any injuries that officer may be carrying at that time, and what sight or angle and point of view they have, their positioning in the room. They may see or see things differently based on where they're positioned in the room, based on perception. As we move further out onto the model, we have some response options that the officers may utilize. One is purely officer presence. That is just the person in uniform or identifying themselves as a police officer, just showing up to a scene may have an impact on subject behavior. Communication, certainly one that we promote heavily, is utilizing communication, giving direction, and trying to get compliance. Then we move into physical control, and then the use of intermediate weapons, and finally, lethal force. So to give you a bit of an understanding of the use of force in 2021, Saskatchewan Police Commission mandates all municipal police services to report our use of force statistics on a quarterly and annual basis. And each event where force is utilized may have multiple use of force. So for example, we may attend to a call or an incident where we could have physical strikes by an officer which are ineffective. There might be the use of a conducted energy weapon, and there could be use of a canine apprehension. So for that example, that's one event, but three separate uses of force. Our review process, whenever force is used, an officer needs to report it to their field supervisor. It is then reviewed. Memorandums from the officers involved are gathered. We gather video, photographs, and any other available information. And that field supervisor is tasked with reviewing and critiquing that incident and suggesting and taking corrective action if required. It's then forwarded to the review board. So we examine the use of force packages. We then convene and discuss it as a board. Then we'll assign it a category or a level for each individual use of force. And then we'll take up follow-up action when necessary. So going into 2021, a little chart that might help illustrate it. We reviewed 282 separate uses of force, which is a decrease of 13.5% from the year of 2020. We also had the restraint chair used in our detention center, and it's utilized when subjects are exhibiting self-harm or destructive behavior. There's an authorization and a review process that is attached to the use of the restraint chair, and it was utilized 8 times in 2021, which is down from 21 incidents in the year before. Looking at calls for service, the Regina Police Service were required to use force less than 0.5% of all calls for service. So 282 times use of force was utilized out of 62,866 calls for service. And those calls for service are just, I don't know how you term it, but I guess formal ones that are dispatched. That does not include any informal police contacts or things that aren't run through our call center. So our actual contacts with the public would be significantly larger than that, but that is a measurable one for us on calls for service. So as you can see, we have a lot of public interaction and very few relative uses of force in relation to that. Also looking at our canine contacts, of 176 canine arrests, only 12% resulted in a canine contact with subject. So again, not a significant number when you look at the number of interactions that we have. So we talked a little earlier, a couple slides ago, about review board categorizations. Whenever we review a file, we categorize it into one of four levels. Level 1 is we feel that the force was appropriate and it was compliant with our policies. Level 2 is where the force was appropriate, but maybe not fully compliant with policy that we've laid out, and there might be some coaching or training issues that we need to implement. Level 3 was where the force was deemed inappropriate. It's not at the level of criminal charges, but we would look at some remedial remedial training or potentially disciplinary action. And level 4 is where we deem the force inappropriate and we're looking at criminal charges for that incident. So those are the 4 categories that we would be classifying our use of force into. In 2021, we had 253 level 1 classifications and 29 level 2. We did not have any level 3 or level 4 categorizations. So one of the goals for the Regina Police Service is continuous improvement, and we are always striving to improve in the area of use of force. So we utilize coaching and feedback for our members. Historically, since I've been involved with the board or the Use of Force Review Board over my career, a lot of the feedback would come from the board. What we're starting to see now with a lot of the work we've done is that our field supervisors are actually doing that intervention and implementing coaching and feedback to the members directly as part of the review process. So what that does is it gets that feedback into the officers' hands much earlier in the process and will help them to improve their response. So our overall goal is to improve the understanding of the appropriate application of force. Our training is another area where we are striving to continually improve. We're trying to improve officer perception and assessment so that when they go into a scenario, they're making appropriate decisions. And how we're doing that is we're doing scenario-based training, which is resolvable with de-escalation techniques through communication. We always focus on worst-case scenario training, but a lot of the focus was never on maybe ones that were resolvable through de-escalation. So it's certainly an area of focus that we're applying where our officers have a so-called winnable situation just by using proper de-escalation and communication. And we're always trying to continually improve our officers' abilities to articulate when they use force. So when they submit their packages and their memorandums, we also help them with making sure that they cover off what are the appropriate things that they observed, the perception, and why they used the force they did. So in conclusion, we saw a reduction in use of force in 2021. We are continued in our goal to increase understanding and accountability of force utilized by the Regina Police Service. And we are continuing to work on our efforts through coaching, feedback, and training. And if there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Inspector Walter. I have a question for you from Councillor Bresciani.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Inspector Walter. I just have one question in regards to feedback you've indicated from the officer themselves or maybe the partner. What about feedback from the public that might witness the use of force? Where does that come into play with this?
Well, it depends on the situation. Like I said, we try to gather as much information as we can. So people that may be spoken to in some of the situations would be the suspect or the person involved from the public. If they have a complaint or a concern, we would also speak to, if there's anybody there that was present at the scene, our sergeant, part of the review process, may include speaking to that person depending on the circumstances. There's witness officers that would be spoken to. It really just depends on the nature and the severity of the use of force. Obviously, if it's a significant use of force, then there's going to be a much deeper investigation into it. But a lot of the information is just gathered through video, speaking to the subject or witnesses, and then the involved officers' memorandums.
Great, thank you. And the last question, you talked of just at the end here about ways to train the officers to help them gain the extra skills, perception assessment, the de-escalation. So how do officers get into that training? Are they held regularly, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, depending on what level of an officer you are, if you're at a recruit level, there's 20 weeks of police college training and involved, and there's a significant amount of use of force and defensive tactics training involved there. And that works on all the physical aspects, the assessment, the use of force, decision-making. As an officer who's out in the field, we've done recruit training, we do block training every year, and part of that block training is use of force, and this would all be included in that. Scenario-based training is also included in firearms training, or public officer and safety training. In that block training, we would have that scenario training as well as our conducted energy weapon training. All are incorporating scenarios, and there's certainly been an increased implementation of putting scenarios in where we're not always resolving to worst case scenario, where if I do the proper steps, that the subject behavior will modify in some circumstances, and in others they won't.
Okay, great. Thank you, and it's great to see the use of force has been down, so that's great. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Councillor Brasciani. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you. Regarding the decrease of 13.5%, can you comment on why that might be the case? Is it a coincidence, fewer number of incidents, or is it a change in the actual response?
You know, I don't know exactly why it's down. I mean, I can guess at some things, but I'm reluctant to do that. A lot of this is out of our control. I mean, it depends on what we're encountering. Really, we have to go in to a situation with an assessment of what information we have on our way to the call, what we're visualizing as we roll up. And a lot of the things are you know, it's based on what we're seeing and what we're encountering. So 13.5% is down. I don't know why that is, but the de-escalation and some of that training may have contributed to some of that. It's hard to measure that because you don't know. You know, one incident in 2020 that I went to may be completely different than the same type of circumstances I went to in 2021. A lot of that behavior is predicated on the subject and what decisions they make, because that's really what's driving our response. You know, I may provide direction to somebody and they choose to accept it, and we're not going to have a use of force. May give direction to somebody, they don't choose to accept that direction, and it evolves into a use of force. So I don't know. It could be just the types of things that we're encountering.
Can I just jump in, Mayor Masters, and add a bit to that? And I think Brad is bang on with his explanation. And it's very similar to the discussion we have on crime rates. If crime rates are down, why? What's contributing? Well, I can't throw a dart and tell you it's exactly this one thing. But we're undertaking a survey starting in early July with members that are arrested and in our detention unit. That's a pretty unique data set. So having researchers and a couple of people that are working on this project from the University of Alberta in our detention center, basically doing interviews with people that have been arrested. And what they're talking about and the questions they're asking are you know, really trying to understand, number one, what in life has led them to ending up on this day in our detention unit. What things could have happened or could be different in their life that might prevent that. But there's also a portion of the questions that are being asked that deal with the interaction. So how did the officer's actions dictate your actions? And what could you have done different, you, the person that was arrested, what could you have done different that might have changed this situation or changed what your interaction with police looked like? And at the end of this study, of course, we'll have a better understanding of things like the importance of de-escalation, because Brad is bang on that the subject's behavior often dictates the level of force that's used. But we also know that the police officer's behavior can sometimes escalate a situation or de-escalate a situation depending on where we go. And so I think, you know, the increased efforts that have been put into de-escalation, not just by our police service, but at the Saskatchewan Police College, can't help but have a positive impact. Now, that said, it's just like crime stats. I can't promise you that next year we're going to see another decrease in use of force. It's very much dependent on the situations as they unfold. There's definitely some focused attention on this, and we'll have some data and some information based on this piece of project that we're doing with our people in detention over the next few weeks, and that will help dictate perhaps more training that we need to do, or other parts of the justice system that need help to try and streamline these interactions. It's really about how do we deliver good customer service to the people that find themselves in our detention units. So it's an interesting study, and it's something that I think is going to help dictate future work that we do on training, de-escalation, and those types of things.
Great, thank you. Through the chair, my second question related to the 2021 stats on the canine deployment with injury. Can you comment a little bit on how those incidents are investigated, the degree of culpability, considering we're dealing with both an animal as well as a canine unit? So when that arises, what's different maybe about the review? To what extent is the dog itself held accountable versus the officer in charge?
Sure. So the Use of Force Review Board, as I said, is made up of 7 members and a chair. Each one of the people that are selected for that panel typically have some experience or background in one of the areas. So we typically have 1 or 2 people that have served in the canine unit in the past. So they've got some understanding of what the training is and what policy. They've got a little more experience and in-depth knowledge of that. So when we have a canine incident, we take one extra step on the review. The field supervisor, who may or may not have canine experience, the sergeant, oversees the review, but all of the information is forwarded to the canine supervisor, and they do a review, or one of their members of that unit will do a review, and they will comment based on the decisions and the tactics that were utilized, how it relates to the policy of the RPS and canine, and also how it relates to the training. And they will give us feedback on, as a board, feedback on whether it was compliant with policy, whether it was compliant with training, or if there's coaching issues or handler issues, even dog performance issues. If a dog is doing something that's completely out of the realm of what the training is, then it gets addressed. And we have had a few incidents in our reviews where there was minor decision-making things, or maybe how they approach things that we've done coaching and feedback on for the canine handlers. And it's particularly important when we have, maybe a new handler that's just gaining experience. Some of their decisions, they can use some coaching on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. I see no other questions. I just have one. Looking at the numbers, can you speak at all to what is distinctive about the situation where the decision is made to deploy the canine unit?
Yeah, a lot of times canine is utilized in a lot of different ways. One is for tracking and finding people. Somebody flees. We'll take an example of a stolen car. If somebody flees from a stolen car, particularly in a residential area, very difficult for us to find them. There's a lot of places to hide. There's a lot of places to cut through alleys and yards. So canine is typically deployed in a situation where they're going to do tracking. A lot of times, there's officer safety issues around that. A foot pursuit can be potentially a dangerous endeavor for a police officer because there's unpredictability of where the person is. You can't see them. You don't know if they're hiding around a corner. You don't know if they possess weapons, those kinds of things. So typically, canine is utilized in those situations, and that is where we see a lot of the apprehensions, the bites or the contacts in those circumstances. People that would hunker down maybe in a porch area or behind a garbage can, armed with weapons. A police officer on foot without a dog potentially could run right by that, and now the suspect's behind them. So that's a lot of the situations where we'll utilize the canine unit.
Thank you very much. I see no other questions. Could I have a motion to receive and file the report? Thank you, Councillor Bresciani, and I'll call the question. Anyone opposed? Carried. Up next, PO 22-17, monthly crime statistics. Chief, could I ask that you introduce the report?
Sure. Thank you very much, Mayor Masters. This is our crime stats up to and including the end of April. We're always 1 month behind through the reconciliation of stats. And so what the trend is showing us here as we move closer to halfway through the year is we're seeing an increase in one area, pressure on crimes against property. So right now, year to date, we've seen an increase of 11.5% in crimes against property, and that's pretty much straight across the board with the exception of a couple of areas. Our theft of autos is down currently and our mischiefs are down. But our thefts, our break and enters to businesses and our arsons are all trending high, and so overall our increase is 11.5%. Happy to say that crimes against the person are actually showing a decrease of close to 10%. We're 9.5% down where we were at this time last year. And a couple of those categories of serious incidents like a murder or attempt murder are down significantly. We're down 77% in the area of attempt murders, which is significant when you consider the serious victimization that comes along with those crimes. So when you combine both categories, we're 6.4% increase in our crime stats, and that really is attributed to the fact that the number of property crimes is much more significant, is much higher than the number of crimes against the person. So even though we're seeing 11.5 increase on one and a 9.5 decrease on the other, it's not as simple as subtracting one from the other. There is a larger number of property crimes, so the increase overall to our crime stats is 6.4%. At the back, we've got our dashboards, which shows a couple of things. Drug overdoses, while continuing to be a pressure and a problem, have definitely slowed from where we were last year. Last year, we ended the year with 1,808 overdoses for the entire year. This year, reported overdoses to emergency services is 126, with to date 6 apparent deaths up to the end of April. And then I won't go through the daily and monthly dashboards, but you are seeing a slight decrease in the number of domestic conflicts that we attend. We were attending as high as 21 a day. Right now, in the year 2022, we've been averaging about averaging about 18 per day. Missing people, suicide calls, drug seizures all remain fairly consistent with what we've seen over the last couple of years. That's the update on monthly crime stats. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Chief. Any members of the commission have any questions for Chief on the monthly crime stats? Seeing none, thanks very much, Chief. And thanks to Amy for the data. Can I get a motion to receive and file? Thank you, Commissioner Yee. Call the question. Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Can I have a motion for private session? Thank you, Councilor Bresciani, and we'll recess for 20 minutes at this point in time, unless you don't have press, in which case we would shorten that back to 15. Chief, thanks very much.